Steel City. Is everybody ready to go? Let's proclaim the greatest radio show.
Welcome, fans, to our Week 15 edition of our Fantasy Football Wide Receiver segment. I'm your host, Jim Sella. I want to thank you for listening to The Spread. In studio with the best team ever, producer Jay Dash, senior baseball analyst Big Easy, and special guest host Jeff Keel. How's everyone doing?
And we have you forgot another special guest. Jeff's gun is in the studio tonight with us.
Please believe, keeping us safe, Big Bertha.
There'll be no breaking into this broadcast booth.
Tier 1, Antonio Brown, Kelvin Johnson, Demaryius Thomas, Julio Jones, who's questionable and hasn't practiced yet, Jordy Nelson, Emmanuel Sanders, Des Bryant, A.J. Green, and Elshon Jeffrey moved up into Tier 1 this week since Brandon Marshall is donezo.
It's crazy in fantasy football. It's skewed so much now. Wide receivers, everybody's elite. My only hope is Julio Jones drops down to like tier 25, because if he has a big week against the Steelers, we may not come out on top.
Well, he's beat up, right? Because
Yeah,
I don't even see him there. I'm looking at tiers, and wait. Oh, he is in tier 1. Julio Jones is elite.
I think he's elite.
Yeah,
I think
240
yards or something last
Julio
week.
Jones is
Julio
elite.
Jones, yeah,
He's leading the league in receiving yards.
Yeah.
That seems pretty elite to me.
He leads the league in receiving yards.
Just passed Antonio Brown up last week.
Yep.
Wow.
Tier 2, T.Y. Hilton, Odell Beckham Jr., Mike Evans, Jeremy Maclin, Randall Cobb, Josh Gordon, and Kelvin Benjamin.
ODB.
Yeah, Odell Beckham, he's coming up huge. The Steelers passed on him in the draft to take Ryan Shazier, and it's not looking like a great pick right now. Shazier's been out most of the year, and Beckham's been tearing it up.
And this is an excellent matchup for Beckham, too. He goes against Washington, who is not good against the pass at all.
No, and they stuff the run, so they force you into throwing.
Macklin's fell off. He's garbage.
Kelvin Benjamin could have had a better year if he'd had more consistent play from Cam Newton. Poor Cam was fighting injuries all year long. Tough year for him. Now he's in this car accident after he finally got healthy, and he has 2 fractures in his back. So Derek Anderson's going to be at quarterback this week. He could be feeding the ball to Benjamin, but he really is their only receiving target down there.
I'm telling you, dude. Sanchez don't
Don't forget
see.
about Greg Olsen.
Sanchez don't see Macklin.
Macklin's been playing just fine recently.
Nope.
See, I never really was a big Jeremy Maclin fan.
Tier 3, Keenan Allen, Julian Edelman, Roddy White, who is also questionable for the Atlanta, and Kenny Stills.
Roddy White's been questionable for about the last 2 years.
Makes those plays.
Yeah.
Roddy White is like a poor man's Larry Fitzgerald.
That's exactly what he is, Easy.
That's it. He's like Larry Fitzgerald, but he's not Larry Fitzgerald.
Well, I think Roddy White has had a better season than Larry Fitzgerald. Not completely Larry Fitzgerald's fault. He's been through plenty of quarterbacks this season, but Roddy White is definitely the better fantasy play, and he's had a better season in real life, too.
Kenny Stills is going up against Chicago. They give up the 11th most points to fantasy wide receivers. Stills was a huge letdown last week with just 3 catches for 23 yards, but he's been pretty consistent over the previous 7 weeks. He has 337 yards and 2 touchdowns in his last 3 road games. He's turned out to be the number 1 target down there in New Orleans. So if Drew Brees is on, usually Kenny Stills is on.
Tier 4, DeAndre Hopkins, Golden Tate, Andre Johnson, who is questionable. I think he has, his status is uncertain. He's dealing with a concussion right now. Sammy Watkins and Vincent Jackson.
Dude got blasted in the head, Johnson. I seen that hit.
I like Sammy Watkins going up against the Packers. Green Bay gives up the 3rd most points to fantasy wide receivers. He had 7 catches for 127 last week on 12 targets after 4 straight weeks of 4 catches or less and 35 yards or less. Denver's going to be throwing a lot and scoring a lot of points, so Buffalo's going to have to do the same thing if they want to keep up. They don't have a lot outside of Watkins at the receiver position. They got Fred Jackson in the backfield who's good in the passing game, but if you want big plays, you're going to be throwing the ball Sammy's way.
Hopkins and Johnson have tough matchups this week going at Indy, who led up the 4th fewest to fantasy wide receivers, but I still like playing them this week. You know they're going to be behind and they're going to need to pass, so I'm playing them.
Fitzpatrick's a quarterback for them, right?
Fitzpatrick, yes.
Tier 5, Brandon LaFell, who's questionable, Steve Smith, Jordan Matthews, Jarvis Landry, and Marquise Colston.
I like Jarvis Landry.
Bueller.
He has a tough matchup this week, though. In New England, they let up the third fewest to fantasy wide receivers, but he has 6 straight double-digit fantasy weeks. He just doesn't have the huge games. He has no more than 68 yards receiving in any game during that 6-game span. And the one plus side is Revis is probably going to be covering Wallace most of the game, so that should leave Landry with the better matchup.
You would think Steve Smith would be a great play going up against the Jaguars, but they give up the 14th fewest points to fantasy wide receivers, and Smith has been slowing down a little bit as the year goes by. He had 7 catches for 70 yards and a touch on 11 targets last week, which was his most since week 1. He's had 2 TDs over the last 3 weeks, but just 4 catches for 19 yards in his last 2 home games.
Yeah, but Turi Smith isn't 100% yet, and if he doesn't play, Steve Smith should have a good game. And even if Smith does play, he only played 15 snaps last week because of his injury, and Steve Smith definitely turned out a good game.
I'll tell you what do you think about Marquise Colston against that struggling Chicago defense?
Yeah, 3 straight double-digit fantasy performances for Colston.
He's been a little bit of a letdown this year, but, who knows? Maybe it's just time to shine a little bit.
He hasn't really been seeing more looks since Cooks got hurt, but he has been playing a little bit better, and I do like Colston this week. Both Kenny Stills and Marquise Colston. Tier 6, Mike Wallace. I think Percy Harvin, I have him listed as questionable, but I think he is out this week now. Deshaun Jackson and Anquan Bolden.
Anquan Bolden is probably the best receiver, the most consistent receiver out of the bunch. Bolden has a tough matchup against Seattle, though. They give up the fewest points to wide receivers. They give almost the fewest points to everybody. They're pretty much beast mode. Bolden has just 7 catches for 72 yards over the last 2 games after 8 straight double-digit performances. He's a PPR beast. What can I say?
Yeah, he has a brutal matchup this week, though.
Yeah, it's tough.
He did have 9 catches for 112 yards against them earlier this year. So he can get it done against them, but Colin Kaepernick's playing like such garbage.
Yeah, that's what makes me scared.
Colin Kaepernick is garbage.
Tier 7, Robert Woods, Charles Johnson, Martavis Bryant, and Marquez Wilson.
Martavis Bryant's play has been all over the map this year, going up against Atlanta, who gives up the 4th most points to fantasy wide receivers. He had 4 catches for 109 yards and a touch last week, but 94 of those came on 1 play. He still had 6 targets, and both of his 100-yard games have come on the road this season. It seems like when Bryant gets more involved in the passing game, the Steelers are definitely more successful, so let's hope for a big performance from him.
Brandon Marshall, since he got hurt, Marquise Wilson's going to take his place in the offense, so he's going to start. He's 6'4", and he's fast. He could be a nice sleeper this week because you know how much Chicago passes. And Brandon Marshall and Elshon Jeffrey both been getting it done this season. And he had 5 targets last week already. So Marcus Wilson, that's my sleeper of the week.
I like it.
Tier 8, Kendall Wright, Eric Decker, Reggie Wayne.
I hear Reggie Wayne's been battling a triceps injury for most of the year, and that's why he's been questionable and been struggling as of late. The Texans give up the 2nd most points to fantasy wide receivers. Wayne is expected to play, but he hasn't done a lot, like I said, since being injured. The last 3 weeks, he has 8 catches and 46 yards. He had just 4 catches for 35 yards against Houston in Week 6. The targets are still there, but he hasn't caught as many. He has 55 catches on 103 targets, I think, this season.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah, that's not good at all. That's sad too, because Reggie Wayne's been one of the best wide receivers over the last 10 years.
If Percy Harvin is out, Eric Decker may be a decent play at Tennessee. We know how terrible their defense is, along with their offense. And he had 6 catches for 89 yards last week. And the Jets' offense didn't look too bad. They scored some points. He has 4 straight double-digit fantasy performances on the road. And like we said, this matchup doesn't get any better.
Tier 9, Marquise Lee, Dante Moncrief, Malcolm Floyd, and Allen Hurns.
Yeah, Allen Hurns at Baltimore, they let up the most of fantasy wide receivers, so it's definitely a great matchup for him. Plus, he had 10 targets last week. He only caught 5 of them and only had 36 yards, but he did score a touchdown. I like Marquise Lee more in this offense, but Allen Hurns might turn out a decent game. You still got to remember Cecil Shorts is there, but he's been all over the place this season too.
Easy. This has got to be one of your favorite tiers because it's got two players from the same team. Marquise Lee also going up against Baltimore. Lee's had 11 catches for $142 and a touch over the last 2 games. This is a great matchup going against Baltimore. They're just terrible against the pass this year. If Blake Bortles can get his act together, maybe he's banging a new hot chick and he'll be ready to go. Hearns and Lee could end up balling this week.
Nah.
Ain't gonna happen.
Bortles is gonna have more interceptions than touchdowns, so.
Well, Baltimore's
ain't
pass
doing
defense
nothing.
is the worst in the league,
Tier
so I don't
9.
see why you think that's going to happen.
Yeah, well, because when good teams play bad teams, the bad teams don't do well.
Like you were saying, Reggie Wayne is questionable, and he's been questionable pretty much all season. And Dante Moncrief has become the clear number 3 wide receiver in Indianapolis, and this is a great matchup. Houston's, they let up the second most of fantasy wide receivers. He didn't do much last week, but the week before he had 3 catches for 134 yards and a touchdown. So he's another guy that can have a big game if you're looking for a wide receiver in deep leagues.
Tier 10, we got Michael Crabtree, Torrey Smith, Greg Jennings, and Doug Baldwin.
Yeah, Torrey Smith, he's questionable. I might... If he hasn't practiced yet, I'm not sure. He's not looking good to play to begin with, but I'm not even sure I would play him at all.
I might play Doug Baldwin going up against San Fran, and I know San Fran's great against fantasy wide receivers, giving up the second fewest points. Baldwin had 5 catches for 97 yards and a touch last week at Philly. As much as this looks like a tougher matchup to me, Seattle just shreds San Francisco, and I just have a feeling he's my sleeper of the week, I guess. I think Doug Baldwin has a real big game against the 49ers, who are just absolute garbage this year.
Michael Crabtree's been playing better recently. He has double digits in PPR in 3 of his last 4 games, but at Seattle, they let up the fewest of fantasy wide receivers. Colin Kaepernick, garbage. I'm not trusting it.
Hashtag PPR.
Tier 11, Cecil Shorts, Nate Washington, Chris Hogan, Pierre Garçon.
Brother. Nate Washington, he could have a big game. He's going up against the Jets. They're terrible. They give up the 7th most points to fantasy wide receivers. He'll be number 1 again if Wright misses his 2nd straight week.
At least be number 2 because Justin Hunter is done for the season.
Yeah. Washington's never been someone that runs higher percentage routes, and he's kind of hard to trust because he drops a lot of balls, but he's big play receiver. And down at tier 11, I think big plays are about the only thing that are going to get you points.
Well, Chris Hogan has a great matchup this week going versus Green Bay. They led up the 3rd most of fantasy wide receivers, and like we said 20 times over already, Buffalo should be passing a ton in this game. I like Robert Woods and Chris Hogan in this game, along with who you said, Sammy Watkins.
Brother.
Hogan had 7 for 54 and a touchdown last week, too, so it's not like this is some stretch by any matter.
He's going to leg drop the Packers right in the middle of the field.
Tier 12, Andrew Hawkins, Ruben Randall, Mohamed Sanu, Eddie Royal, and Wes Welker.
Is Wes Welker ever going to have a big week?
He had a good week last week, 6 for 82.
I'm talking a big week. Is he ever going to have a Wes Welker week again?
No, those days are long gone.
Should he just retire with Troy and go to Kokomo?
Troy staying in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I know. I heard that.
Yeah.
Did you hear that interview the other day? Troy said he's never leaving Pittsburgh. He's made this his permanent home.
Very
Good for
nice.
you, Troy. Follow us at bet_the spread.
Ruben Randall has a good matchup this week, but he has just 10 targets over his last 3 games after having 9 or more in 8 straight games. So he's pretty much just fell off a cliff. Preston Parker's actually getting more looks than him, but I'd still play Randall over
I'd
Parker.
play Randall this week. I completely agree with you, J-Dash. I like this matchup against Washington, 13th most fantasy points to wide receivers, and
They got to throw the ball to somebody in New York.
it's exactly
Odell
it.
Beckham Jr. mostly.
Yeah, Beckham gets the big plays. Randall's that over the middle guy. Gets the,
He needs to
decent
be.
catches.
They need
He's
to
a
start
big
throwing
body.
the ball more. Tier 13, Harry Douglas, Terrence Williams, Preston Parker, James Jones, Devontae Adams, and Kamar Aiken, given that Torrey Smith is probably not going to play.
There's another name you pull out of a hat. I don't even know who Kamar Aiken is. Is he related to Clay Aiken? Does he sing well? I mean, what does this guy do?
He plays for the Baltimore Ravens, and he probably will be the number 2 wide receiver this week. And he didn't look too bad last week. Even though this matchup isn't too terrible for him, I'm going to say he doesn't repeat his decent performance from last week.
Well, you didn't answer my question. Is he related to Clay Aiken?
Obviously not.
Oh, well, I don't know why that's
Well, how about
obvious,
Harry
but
Douglas?
okay.
You want to take a little bit of a gamble. You know, Harry Douglas, you don't know what you're going to get out of Roddy White or perhaps even Julio Jones. So he might be worth a gamble there against that struggling Pittsburgh pass defense.
Yeah, he might not be a terrible play if both Jones and White play, but if one of those two have to sit out, Harry Douglas could be a huge play. Tier 14, Dwayne Bowe, Marcus Wheaton, Jermaine Kearse, Riley Cooper, Rod Streeter, and Andre Holmes.
Easy. Did you learn who Rod Streeter is by now?
Don't know who Rod Streeter is, but I do know that Dwayne Bowe won't catch a touchdown this week.
Yes, he will not catch a touchdown. And Oakland lets up the 6th fewest to fantasy wide receivers to begin with, so good luck, Alex Smith.
Yeah, Bo's not going to catch much of anything except maybe the mumps from Sidney Crosby.
What about your boy Marcus Wheaton? This is a good matchup for him. Is he going to get anything done?
Wheaton's been so streaky this year. I don't even know if you can call it streaky because I don't think he's put back-to-back good performances together.
Rod Streaky.
I think it's so much hit or miss with Wheaton. It's either going to be him or Bryant to have a big game behind Brown. One of them has to for us to have a chance at winning this game. And I think Martavis Bryant has a better chance than Wheaton. I think by next year, Wheaton's going to fall to 3rd on this depth chart.
I think he already is.
Well, that wraps up our wide receiver segment for Week 15. I want to thank you guys for coming in studio with me today. Thank you, fans, for listening. You can follow us on Twitter at bet_the_spread. You can like us on Facebook, subscribe to that YouTube channel. Any fantasy requests or questions you got, hit us up 24/7. We'll get back to you.